Here we go with the second set of notes in this section, this one on plankton. So before we can get too far in our discussion of plankton, we have to define what plankton are. Plankton are defined as organisms that float or are at the mercy of the current. So mostly these things are going to be small animals that can control, or plants I should say, that can control their position in the water a little bit. Like this guy over here, he can swim, but overall he's going wherever the ocean wants to bring him. Within that division there are a couple different types of plankton. One is called holoplankton. These guys spend their whole lives as plankton. So this copepod, so you guys know Plankton from SpongeBob, that's who this is, a copepod. Alright, this guy is always going to be a copepod, he's always going to be small, he's always going to live his life as a little critter in the water. Versus meroplankton are things that are basically temporary plankton. Okay, so this crab larvae is an example of meroplankton. He starts off as this little critter that again is at the mercy of the ocean, but eventually he's going to turn into an adult crab, and you guys know what crabs look like. They're able to walk, they're able to swim, they can control their position in the water column or their location independent of the currents. Plankton can be further broken down into different types of bacteria based on what kinds of critters they are. The first and the simple type all over the place in the ocean are bacterioplankton. So these guys are bacteria. These pictures just go in order. So the bacterioplankton are these guys over here. Next we have phytoplankton. So these are kind of like the plants of the sea, basically like the grass of the sea, so algae, which you would normally call algae. Really phytoplankton could be individual cells or colonial organisms. These guys over here, so they're all photosynthetic little critters, and these guys are obviously really important because they're primary producers. And they are the bottom of the food chain, just like grass feeds our food chain. These are like the grass of the sea feeding that food chain. The next type would be zooplankton. Right? Zoo is like animals. You go to the zoo to see animals. Zoology is the study of animals. Zooplankton are the animal-like plankton. So the guys over here that are animal-like, mostly copepods. These are just little critters that swim around the sea and feed lots of little fish. And then floating seaweed would also technically be considered plankton. Even though it's much, much larger than the other things, it's not controlling its position in the water at all. It's totally at the mercy of the currents. So why should we even care about plankton? Why do we need to study plankton, study little critters that live in the water, some of them only like 1 cell big, no big deal? Well, together there's a lot of them, okay, and they occupy a very, very important part of our food chain. So trophic status is your place in the food chain, and these guys are considered the primary producers and consumers of the sea. So primary producers are the first things that produce energy in a food chain. So the photosynthetic organisms, they are the first things that have energy. They get their energy from the sun. And then a primary consumer is the first thing doing the eating. So these are the little guys. They eat little zooplankton, maybe eat the little phytoplankton, and then the little zooplankton get eaten, and so on and so forth. You can see that down here. Here's the sun giving your energy to the phytoplankton. Then they get eaten by the zooplankton, so they're the first consumers. Then these guys are going to get eaten by bigger fish or maybe really, really big mammals and whatnot. Also, they're pretty important because they produce 50% of the world's oxygen. It's an incredible amount. We always think of all of our oxygen coming from trees, but the ocean is producing a lot of oxygen too because there's a lot of biomass in the ocean that's doing photosynthesis. And then finally, some can be toxic, so it's important to know about what can kill you. One example of that we're going to talk about in class is red tide. So this is a type of algae that can produce a toxin. This is actually red tide over here, and just to give you some reference, this is a boat, and this is all algae that's red in color and making the water red, and it makes that water toxic. There's also something called paralytic shellfish poisoning. So periodically, especially even in Oregon, beaches will get closed for shellfishing because these guys just eat whatever's in the water. The shellfish just eat whatever's in the water, so if they suck up some toxic plankton, they have that in their digestive system, and then if you were to eat a clam or something like that, an oyster, you could actually get this. And it can be toxic because it could paralyze your diaphragm, which is the muscle that controls breathing, or your heart. But more often than not, it's really just kind of makes you numb. Like it makes your lips tingle and your tongue goes numb and things like that, which is obviously not really all that good, but it could possibly be deadly. And finally, I want to talk about some of the unique adaptations that phytoplankton have to help them survive, or I should say all zooplankton have to help them survive. One is their surface area to volume ratio. A lot of them have a flat shape, like this guy over here, and you may recall, maybe not, from Biology 1, surface area to volume ratio. The more surface area you have, the easier it is for your cells to absorb food, so this could be beneficial for them to absorb nutrients. Buoyancy, they're able to float or stay higher up in the water column. They achieve this by sometimes having air bubbles or oil droplets, because oil is less dense than water and it floats. These help these guys stay higher up in the water column. Or they might have a flat body shape, so in addition to helping with surface area to volume ratio, that flat body shape, or having spines or something like that would help them slow their sinking. And these guys together, why do you want to be up at the top? Because that's where the bright light is. Also, the water's a little bit warmer, so they can do photosynthesis a lot better. Of course, the downside is that's where they can get chowed down upon. So there we go. That's the end of our brief unit on taxonomy and plankton.